a surfboard, an Indian farmer, a medical report, and toothpaste. Weird combination, right? In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about how these 4 slides are related, not only to each other, but to every one of you. And not only to every one of you, but to every philanthropic organization and person in the world. Ben Thompson is a surfer dude. He loves surfing on the waves as much as he can. One of the things that challenges him, though, when he's riding on the waves is the sludge that's in the ocean. So the other part of Ben is that he's also an engineer. And one day, he decided to create SmartFin. SmartFin is a sensor that surfers put underneath their surfboard, and this sensor tracks the salinity, acidity, and temperature of the water according to the surfer's location. This data is now being used by climate change researchers around the world who are now tracking data that they never could have had before because traditional sensors in the ocean would quickly get eroded. Riken Gandhi is a 29-year-old Microsoft researcher, and a few years ago, what he realized was the plight of the agriculture space in India. 70% of the population in India is in agriculture, and when he was working at Microsoft Research, he began to see that many of the how-to videos to teach farmers new best practices were very poorly adopted. So he decided to create an initiative called Digital Green, and Digital Green allowed and put the idea of how-to videos into the farmer's hands. So think of a YouTube meets American Idol, where farmers around India are now in the director's chair, creating their own videos of how-to best practices in their region and according to the crops that they're growing. And today, thousands of videos are on a community called Farmer Book. Think of it as a Facebook for Indian farmers. This Farmer Book has not only been used in India, but has also expanded to other countries, including Ghana and Ethiopia. In addition, research has now shown that the Farmer Book model is 7 times more adopted than other traditional models by the government in terms of adopting new best practices. Jeannie Pieper, when she was 4 years old, faced a medical report that completely changed her life. She was diagnosed with FOB, a very rare disease, and she spent the next 17 years of her life scouring from doctor to doctor to try to better diagnose and treat her illness. Just to give you a sense, FOB is a disease that was discovered in 1736, but in the entire 20th century, there were only 2 research reports of FOB. When Jeannie was in her mid-20s, she met one doctor named Dr. Zasloff, who had met 18 patients in his lifetime that had this disease, and she decided to ask a different question. She said, what if I connected all of these patients that had this disease? What could happen? And it started as a journey that Jeannie went upon with an email newsletter and initial conversations connecting with people across the world. It then turned into meeting at annual barbecues. It then became an emotional support group. But soon after, this community began to grow over time. It became the first informal knowledge network for doctors and researchers on this disease. These patients around the world were better able to diagnose symptoms that they had seen and commonalities. And today, this network has also pulled the first ever funding at the University of Pennsylvania for her rare disease. Today, Jeannie's model of connecting rare disease communities has become a model around the world. And lastly, Colgate, as we all know, is a toothpaste company. And a few years ago, one Colgate executive had a very big science problem. He had developed a new best-in-class fluoride that was going to be embedded in our well-known toothpaste. But there was a mechanical flow issue, and the fluoride was not meshing well with the toothpaste, and it was getting stuck in the mechanical equipment at the company. And all the best chemists internally were working on this and trying to figure it out, but nobody could. And after it took months and months of time, this executive had the courage to say, What if I asked a different network outside of our bounds, which was not very common for Colgate to do? But what they ended up doing is they tried it. They posted this fluoride challenge on a website called Innocentive, which is a community of inventors and problem solvers. Within just a few days, a physicist named Ed Melkerick, shown here, looked at the problem and he said, this isn't a chemistry problem, this is a physics problem. It's about charged particles. You charge the fluoride one way, you charge the toothpaste the other, instantly the problem was solved. Colgate had a problem that lasted for months internally that in just a few days was solved externally. And by the way, they had never really thought about asking the physicists in their own company. But when asked and casting a wider net, they were able to generate the best solution. Ed Melkerick, the physicist shown here, talked to me a bit about how he would have never been hired by Colgate because he didn't have the traditional resume mold. So in today's world, we can not only connect with networks to get new data like Ben Thompson, to connect farmers or peer groups like Jeannie Pieper, but we can also solve our most pressing challenges outside our traditional talent channels. So what do these stories have in common? Well, in the last 10 to 15 years, and so much of what we're here to talk about, we've seen a radical change in connection. And that connection is not just about tools and technologies. It's also shaped our human intelligence. It's shaped how we're curious to ask questions in different ways. It's shaped how we mobilize resources. It's shaped how we have courageous conversations that we never could have had just 5 to 10 years ago. And all of this change has given rise to the power of connectional intelligence. We'll move back one slide. Connectional intelligence is the capability to consistently deliver breakthrough results by harnessing the power of our networks and relationships. We've all heard of IQ as basic knowledge, and about 10 to 15 years ago, emotional intelligence came to stage as a key leadership trait for organizations and leaders. But in today's world, we cannot just rely on IQ and EQ to get big things done. We need connectional intelligence to combine those seemingly unlikely networks, surfers and climate change researchers, farmers across different regions who had never connected before to get big things done. So I want you to take a minute and really think about and reflect, are you using connectional intelligence in your team? And how might your organizations use connectional intelligence? And I want you to think about this, and I also want to share more about where did this research begin. I grew up in a family of Indian immigrants, so you can imagine my childhood was about checking the boxes of success. I went to an Ivy League, I worked on Wall Street, and it was during the last recession that I was working on the trading floor at Lehman Brothers. And I witnessed my own disillusionment, burnout, and frustration with the way organizational structures were set up. I remember the day that Lehman went bankrupt, being at 745 7th Avenue, and asking myself, is this all there is? How can I do more? And at that point, I really began to realize that it wasn't just me that was experiencing this burnout and disillusionment. It was many peers in many different places, whether it was folks working at a private equity firm or an NGO. We were all trying to find new ways to mobilize individuals, to connect in better ways to solve our most pressing challenges and to allow our organizations to thrive. And so it led me on my own soul searching and researching journey that led me to meet folks like Jeannie, like Ben Thompson, and to ask the question, in our connected world, why do some people get big things done and others not? And what I found through this journey is that 10 years ago, we actually began to be introduced to the concept of a connector. We might have heard of Malcolm Gladwell, who coined this concept 10 years ago as one of the 3 types of people that create the rise of social epidemics. But what I realized in my research is that In today's world, the notion of being a connector is actually quite outdated because today we are all connectors. In fact, we are over-connected. So the question is not whether or not we connect, it's how do we connect intelligently to get big things done, to create the change in our organizations, to drive better solutions, to tap better networks when it really matters. And that really led me to define the 3 types of connectors that exist in today's world. The first type are the thinkers. The thinkers are the idea generators that connect ideas. These are people like Ben Thompson who say, how can I solve a problem leveraging my surfing background and my engineering background to create SmartFin, the sensor? The second type are the enablers. The enablers are those that are really the traditional people connectors. They understand who are the people and networks inside and outside my organization that I can bridge to solve a problem in a different way. The enablers are people like Rick and Gandhi, who created the farmer community. They're people like Jeannie Pieper, who connected her rare disease community around the world, leading to breakthrough results like new research and undiscovered symptoms, teaching doctors how to better diagnose the illness. And the third type are the connection executors. The connection executors are the new wave of connectors. They're oftentimes more of the digital connectors, but they are geniuses at mobilizing resources to get something done quickly in action. So in many ways, had Colgate not casted the wide net to find that physicist who was the connection executor that could help get something done and solve a real-time problem in action. So as we think about connectors in today's world, what I really want to push and have you reflect on is what this means for organizations. And this tool is not just about connecting as individuals. I believe it is the key to changing cultures in our organization from the fear of curiosity and courage to the birthplace of creativity and innovation. And this is about driving growth in new ways, managing risk issues, engaging stakeholders in a radically new way to solve our most pressing challenges. So there are a few attributes of connectional intelligence and how-tos that I want to go into now. And they're made up of the 4 attributes that I'll talk about next. The first is on curiosity. And as we think about connectional intelligence is stemmed in the concept of asking questions in a very different way. Asking questions like Jeannie Pieper asked of how can I connect patients around the world, even though no one has ever done this. Or questions like Rick and Gandhi, who said, how can I connect farmers across regions who have never been connected before? So the action for you is to think about how might you design questions in a way to engage others to pitch in and solve problems with you. How might they broaden your perspectives, allow you to see in new ways, to gain and frame problems in new ways? The second attribute of connectional intelligence is the power of play. Oftentimes, some of our greatest breakthroughs happen when we design ways to engage others to have fun, to solve solutions with us. And in many ways, the Colgate executive that said, why don't we crowdsource this problem, at the beginning was very revolutionary for the company because that was not something they would typically ever do. But because they did, they realized they had an untapped community that they could leverage on an ongoing way to solve some of their most pressing real-time challenges. So the action for you is to really think about how you might engage others inside and outside your organization to solve problems with you, to join in the solution generation. The next attribute is the power of courage. And courage from a connectional intelligence perspective is about the ability to have diverse and difficult conversations despite forces to silence and control. Many of the stories I told are rooted in courage and how we take the leap to connect with those that might seem very different. A surfing community that may have never connected with climate change researchers, but today are a combined resource that are saving our oceans. So the action for you is to think about how might you create your own sparring zones in your teams. And when I mean courage, I really am talking about designing ways to have productive conflict because difference is all about dissonance and conflict, and we need to design ways to have sparring zones where we're actually solving challenges and enabling different views to come in to get big things done. And the last attribute is the power of many. As we know in today's world, we can reach so many more in just an instant, and so many of the wonderful talks today have been about how do we connect with that broader pool. So my ask of you to think about is, how might you truly leverage the power of the crowds that you are connected to as an organizational leader, as an individual, as a family member, as a member of a community, as a person in this room, to source better ideas, to solve challenges, and to get some of those seemingly unlikely backgrounds that you may not interact with every day that could be keys to some of the greatest breakthroughs you might see in the future. So a few other things I want to say is that connectional intelligence isn't new. The great leaders of our time, from Leonardo da Vinci to Ben Franklin, have all used connectional intelligence. But in today's world, the scale, depth, and breadth of our connection is radically different. And in many ways, it's changed how we have to interact with those at all levels of our organizations, especially the rising generation, the millennials, who have been raised in an age of hyperconnectivity. And in many ways, we may think that IQ and emotional intelligence are always the highest with many executives or senior leaders. Much of our highest connectional intelligence actually comes from our youngest, those that have been raised in this age and that can use many new ways of connecting to come up with some of our new solutions for our organizations. I want to mention one quick last story that ties into this and that I was discussing with some Fidelity folks here in this room. And it's about a leading law firm who a few years ago noticed something peculiar happening. They noticed that their youngest associates, the millennials at the firm, were billing less hours than ever before. And this was quite peculiar because, one, they were giving them more work, not less work. And two, as we all know, law firms bill by the hour. So it was a concern. So when they dug into it, they realized that this millennial group had created their own Twitter network to help each other solve cases faster. Questions like, who's done this legal citation before? Or, I know we did a case in law school just like this. What was the name of it? And it was radically reducing their billing hours. The flip side is that these associates get promoted through billing hours. So in today's world, connectional intelligence is an unstoppable force. So what is key as leaders here in this room is we have to learn how to evolve with it, how to work across generations in new ways, to change our models, to think about new ways of connecting our organizations, and to also allow new ways of thinking and new mindsets into our organizations. And I believe that when we do that, when we truly tap the connectional intelligence of all of those we are connected to, we'll move from the mindset of what's typically serendipitous and an inspiration or a fact that you may happen to meet to someone, to systematically creating and developing organizations, teams, volunteer communities, networks, families, citizens, patients that can solve our most pressing challenges and get big things done. This has been an inspiration in the journey that led me to co-author my book, Get Big Things Done, with my co-author, Saj Nicole Jonai, and to build a movement around how leaders and organizations everywhere can tap their connectional intelligence to get big things done. So I want to close with sharing just last 3 things to do to kickstart your connectional intelligence here in this room, because I want to say that this room is a great example of connectional intelligence, but it does not stop here in this room. So the first thing I'd like you to think about doing is to spend 10 minutes a day connecting with a new type of perspective outside your own traditional perspective. If you read the Wall Street Journal for 10 minutes in that time span, maybe add 10 minutes to follow a Twitter conversation or 3 hashtags related to the work that you do. The second thing I'd like you to do is to assess yourself and better understand what type of connector are you. Are you a thinker, enabler, or a connection executor? And have 2 conversations a month with those that think very differently from you. And ask them how they might solve a problem that you're facing at that time. And the third is to have conversations with your teams, to find new ways to communicate, to spread information, to share best practices beyond traditional channels of email and social media. And in closing, what I want to say is that in many ways, connectional intelligence, as I said before, is an unstoppable force. But if connectional intelligence is not used for good, it can be used for great evil. And I mean that with all parts of my heart at this point in history. And so I'd like to be here, and I'm grateful to be here to talk to you and ask you the question, how will you unleash your connectional intelligence for all of those that are counting on your creativity, your wisdom, and your heart? Thank you so much again. Grab a copy of the book in the back.